Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a blueprint-level look at the fascinating and, often totally misunderstood world of cybersecurity. Think about it like this. If you owned a physical shop downtown, you'd literally never dream of leaving the cash register wide open, the front door unlocked, and the security cameras switched off when you head home at night, right? Well, cybersecurity is just the practice of protecting those exact same things, your assets, your customers, your data, just in a digital shop. We're going to break down exactly how the pros build that protection, and I promise you, by the end of this, the digital world is going to make a whole lot more sense.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the digital shop, then the CIA triad and the AAA framework. After that, we'll unpack the anatomy of risk, explore surfaces, vectors, and usability, and finally, get to know your threat actors. I know it sounds like a lot of jargon, but don't worry, we're going to unpack these complex concepts step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the digital shop and how we actually protect our assets.
In the physical world, your security is pretty tangible, right? You lock the front door, you install CCTV, you lock your cash in a heavy steel safe, maybe you even hire a security guard. But in the digital world, your shop is your website, your customer database, your payment systems. To protect those, we need digital equivalents. We're using firewalls instead of physical locks and encryption instead of that heavy safe. But here's an absolutely crucial foundational concept. This isn't just about software. True cybersecurity always relies on three pillars: people, process, and technology. You could literally have the best firewalls on the planet. That's your technology. But if your people aren't trained or if your internal processes are just completely flawed, well, that digital front door is still sitting wide open.
That brings us to Section 2, the CIA triad, where we look at the ultimate goals of our security.
The CIA triad. This is the framework that combines three essential principles: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Basically, every single security decision a company makes ties right back to these three pillars. If security professionals can guarantee these three things, they can confidently say their system is secure. Let's break them down real quick.
So, confidentiality is basically privacy. Making sure only the right people can actually see the data. But let's look at integrity. This one is all about trust. It means ensuring your data is completely accurate and hasn't been messed with. Imagine a hacker breaks into a bank's database. Now, they don't actually steal any data, they just quietly add a couple of zeros to their own account. Suddenly, a $500 balance is a $50,000 balance. Now, that's not a confidentiality or privacy issue because they didn't spy on anyone else's account, but it is a massive, catastrophic integrity failure. That data can literally no longer be trusted.
Then we have the third pillar, availability. Look, it absolutely does not matter how perfectly confidential or flawlessly accurate your data is if nobody can actually access it when they need it. A classic attack here is a denial of service, or a DOS attack, where an attacker just floods a system with traffic to completely crash it. Think about a hospital. If a hospital's patient record system goes down in the middle of a medical emergency because of a DOS attack, that's a total availability failure. And in that context, it instantly goes from being a computer glitch to a life-threatening scenario. So we know what we're protecting. Now let's talk about how we protect it in Section 3, the AA framework for access control. Let me ask you this. When you log into a system, how does it instantly know it's you, figure out exactly which files you're actually allowed to read, and quietly keep a record of everything you click on? And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept using an analogy we all know perfectly well: the airport. The three A's stand for authentication, authorization, and accounting. When you walk into the airport and hand over your passport, you're proving who you are. That's authentication. Okay, so once your identity is verified, you get a boarding pass. That pass tells the staff exactly which gate you can go to and which seat you can sit in. You can't just casually wander into first class if you have an economy ticket, right? That's authorization, granting specific permissions. Finally, the airline logs exactly who boarded that plane and exactly when. That tracking, that's accounting. Let's look a bit closer at that very first step, authentication. Actually proving you are who you say you are usually falls into three traditional categories. First, something you know, like a password or a PIN. Second, something you have, like a physical smart card or an authenticator app on your smartphone. And third, something you are, which basically refers to biometrics, like your fingerprint or facial recognition. And this brings us to a buzzword you've probably heard a million times: multi-factor authentication, or MFA. True MFA requires combining factors from different categories. So the crucial point is,
If a website asks for your password and then asks for your mother's maiden name as a security question, which, let's be real, anyone can find on your social media in about 5 seconds, that is not true MFA. Why? Because both of those things are just something you know. To really truly secure a system, you need a password, something you know, combined with something like a temporary code sent to your phone, which is something you have.
Section 4, the anatomy of risk. Now we're going to dive into understanding the actual threats out there.
First up is vulnerability. A vulnerability is simply a weakness. It could be outdated software, a terrible default password, or even an untrained employee. Just think of a vulnerability like an unlocked window on a house. It's for sure a flaw in your security, but if it just sits there and nobody ever tries to open it, nothing bad actually happens. A threat, on the other hand, is the danger itself. Going back to our house analogy, the threat is a burglar actively walking around your neighborhood specifically looking for unlocked windows. Now, the burglar just existing in your neighborhood doesn't mean your house has been broken into yet, but the potential for real harm is definitely out there. So, when you combine a vulnerability with a threat, that is when you get risk. Risk is calculated as the likelihood of an attack multiplied by its impact. For example, an unlocked window on the ground floor right next to a table full of expensive jewelry, yeah, that is a very high risk. But what if that exact same unlocked window is on the 10th floor of a high-rise building with absolutely no fire escape? The vulnerability is identical, but because the likelihood of a burglar actually reaching it is so incredibly low, the risk is practically negligible. This is exactly why security teams don't just run around blindly fixing every single flaw. They step back and assess the actual risk. Moving on to Section 5, Surfaces and Vectors, and the classic battle of security versus usability. Let's move to and see how this builds on our house analogy. We need to clearly distinguish between an attack surface and an attack vector. Your attack surface is basically the total sum of all possible entry points into your digital shop. It is every single door, every window, the mail slot, the chimney, whether they're currently locked or unlocked. Now, the attack vector is the specific route the attacker actually takes. It's the one specific unlocked window they finally choose to climb through. A huge core goal in cybersecurity is minimizing your attack surface, boarding up those unused digital doors, so you radically reduce the number of potential vectors an attacker could possibly find. But here's the ultimate tug of war in this industry: security versus usability. They literally sit on opposite ends of a scale. If you want maximum foolproof security, well, you turn your computer off, unplug it from the wall, and lock it inside a solid concrete vault. Boom, perfectly secure, but obviously it's completely useless. On the flip side, if you want maximum usability, you just remove all passwords and leave the system totally open to the public. Really easy to use, but incredibly insecure. The truth is, every single time you add a new lock or a new security check, you are inevitably spending some of your users' convenience and time. Finding that perfect middle ground is key, and technologies like single sign-on or SSO are prime examples of getting it right. Instead of forcing a poor user to memorize 15 completely different complex passwords for 15 different apps, which is awful for usability and honestly just leads to people using super weak passwords, SSO lets them securely authenticate just once, and boom, that single login grants them access to everything they need. It's a massive win for both the security team and the everyday user.
Finally, Section 6, Know Your Threat Actors. Who exactly is trying to break in? Look, attackers are not a monolith. They have wildly different skill sets and motivations. At the lower end, you have your script kiddies. These are opportunistic folks with pretty low technical skills who just run pre-made malicious scripts they randomly found online. Then you have hacktivists. These groups are driven by political or social ideologies rather than money. They usually just want to make a loud public statement. Next up are the cybercriminals, which is the most common threat to businesses today. They are strictly in it for the cash, running highly sophisticated ransomware or credit card theft operations. And at the very top of the food chain, you have nation-state actors. These are highly resourced, government-sponsored groups carrying out long-term, strategic espionage and actively targeting a country's critical infrastructure. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the reality of where the danger actually comes from. We almost always picture the threat as some hooded hacker sitting in a dark room halfway across the world, right? But check this out. A staggering 60% of all data breaches actually involve an insider element. That could be a malicious, angry former employee actively stealing data, or, much more commonly, a perfectly well-meaning current employee who just accidentally clicked on a really clever phishing email and literally let the attackers right through the front door. Believe it or not, your own people are very often your biggest vulnerability.
And that brings us completely full circle. Whether we're talking about a massive global corporation or just your own personal laptop sitting on your kitchen table, the principles are exactly the same. You have assets you need to protect, you have an attack surface you really need to minimize, and you constantly have to find that sweet spot between staying genuinely secure and actually being able to use your devices without going crazy. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. Take a minute to think about the digital footprint you leave behind every single day. What unlocked windows are currently sitting wide open in your own digital house right now? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and stay secure out there.